April 18, 1945. The ancient city of Nuremberg lay in ruins, its medieval architecture reduced to twisted metal and broken stone beneath a grey April sky. Sergeant Thomas Miller of the United States Army 77th Infantry Division surveyed the devastated streets from atop a half-demolished building, certain that his company would face minimal resistance in this section of the city. He believed that the hardest part of his war was behind him. In less than 1 month, the European conflict would be over, and Thomas would begin his journey home to Connecticut. He could not have imagined how profoundly a simple act of kindness would alter the course of his entire existence. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable true account of how a chance encounter between enemies during humanity's darkest hour would transcend the boundaries of conflict, demonstrating how compassion in a moment of desperation can forge connections powerful enough to redefine a lifetime. The spring air carried the acrid scent of smoke and rubble as Sergeant Miller's unit moved cautiously through the shattered remnants of what had once been a thriving neighborhood. They were part of the final push into southern Germany, clearing sections of Nuremberg that had already been heavily damaged by Allied bombing campaigns. At 24 years old, Thomas had been fighting across Europe for nearly 2 years, having landed at Normandy in the second wave. His weathered face and vigilant eyes betrayed the weight of experiences that had transformed him from a naive factory worker's son into a hardened combat veteran. "Keep your eyes sharp, boys. Jerry might have left, but they've been known to leave presents behind," Lieutenant Hayes called out to the platoon as they navigated through the skeletal remains of apartment buildings. Thomas adjusted his helmet and checked his Thompson submachine gun, a ritual that had become second nature after hundreds of patrols. His squad consisted of 11 men, each with their specialized roles and unique personalities that had become as familiar to him as his own family back home. "Miller, take Rodriguez and Williams and check that building," Hayes ordered, pointing toward a 3-story structure that seemed somewhat less damaged than its neighbors. "The rest of us will secure the square." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, motioning to the 2 privates. "Let's move." Private First Class Eduardo Rodriguez, a 19-year-old from New Mexico, had joined the unit as a replacement just after the Battle of the Bulge. Despite his youth, he had quickly proven himself reliable under fire. Private James Williams, a former schoolteacher from Oregon, was the oldest man in the squad at 32 and served as their unofficial historian, always contextualizing the places they fought through with background knowledge that seemed endless. "Another glorious day touring the European countryside," Williams remarked dryly as they approached the building entrance. "Save the sightseeing for after we clear this place," Thomas responded, though he appreciated the older man's attempts to maintain morale. The 3 soldiers entered the building with practiced precision, moving from room to room on the ground floor before ascending to the second level. The structure had clearly been abandoned in haste. Personal belongings were scattered throughout, photographs still hung crookedly on walls, and in one room a meal remained half-eaten on a table, now covered in a layer of dust and debris. "Looks like the civilians got out before the worst of it," Rodriguez observed as they climbed to the 3rd floor. "That's something at least." Thomas nodded silently. He had seen enough devastated cities and broken lives across France and Germany to last several lifetimes. While the propaganda back home painted all Germans as fanatical supporters of their regime, Thomas had witnessed enough to know that ordinary people, shopkeepers, farmers, and families, had suffered tremendously under the conflict their leaders had unleashed. As they reached the top floor, Thomas heard what sounded like shuffling coming from behind one of the doors at the end of a darkened hallway. "Hold up," he whispered, raising his hand to signal his men. They froze, weapons at the ready. "Someone's here." The 3 soldiers approached the door cautiously, positioning themselves on either side. Thomas called out in his limited German, phrases he had learned specifically for clearing operations. "Kommen Sie heraus! Hände hoch! Come out! Hands up!" Only silence answered him. Thomas nodded to Rodriguez, who stood ready to provide covering fire if necessary, and then kicked the door open, entering in a low crouch with his weapon raised. What he found inside was not an armed enemy soldier, but a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, crouched in the corner of what had once been a kitchen. She was rail-thin, her clothes hanging loosely from her frame, and her eyes were wide with terror as she held her hands up in surrender. Beside her sat a small girl of around 6 years, clinging to the woman's skirt and sobbing quietly. Thomas immediately lowered his weapon. "It's okay," he said softly, first in English and then attempting in broken German. "Wir werden dir nicht wehtun." "We won't hurt you." The woman stared back at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Through her obvious hunger and exhaustion, Thomas could see dignity and intelligence in her gaze. Williams, who spoke serviceable German, stepped forward and addressed her more fluently. After a brief exchange, he turned to Thomas. "Her name is Anna Müller. She says this was her apartment before the bombing started. She came back to try to retrieve some personal items, documents and family photographs. The little girl is her niece, Lena. Her sister and brother-in-law were killed 2 weeks ago in an air raid." Thomas felt a pang of sympathy as he looked at the 2 frightened civilians. This was the reality of total war that no training had prepared him for, not the armed combatants, but the ordinary people caught in the grinding machinery of conflict. The strategic bombing campaigns that had helped break German resistance had also created countless victims like Anna and her niece. "Ask if they have somewhere to go," Thomas instructed Williams. "Somewhere safe." After another exchange in German, Williams shook his head. "She says they were staying at an emergency shelter near the city center, but it was hit 3 days ago. They've been moving from building to building, trying to avoid the fighting. They haven't eaten in nearly 2 days." Thomas nodded and made a decision. He unslung his pack and reached inside, pulling out his rations. American soldiers were well supplied compared to the starving German civilian population. He had a chocolate bar, canned meat, crackers, powdered coffee, and several other items that constituted a day's field rations. Rodriguez noticed what he was doing and spoke up hesitantly. "Sarge, those are supposed to last you until tomorrow's supply run." "I'll manage," Thomas replied simply, holding the food out toward Anna. The young woman looked at the offered rations with a complex mix of emotions playing across her face: hunger, suspicion, pride. She said something in German, her voice soft but firm. Williams translated, "She says she doesn't want American charity, that her country may be defeated, but she still has her dignity." Thomas considered this for a moment, then nodded with respect. "Tell her it's not charity. Tell her it's one human being helping another, war or no war." When Williams translated this, Anna studied Thomas's face carefully, as if searching for mockery or pity. Finding neither, she slowly reached out and accepted the food, immediately turning to give the chocolate bar to her niece, whose eyes widened at the sight of such a treasure. "Danke," Anna said directly to Thomas, meeting his eyes for the first time. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he replied, the simple exchange bridging, for just a moment, the chasm of war that separated them. The encounter might have ended there, one of countless brief interactions between occupiers and occupied that punctuated the final days of the European conflict. But as the 3 American soldiers prepared to leave, having verified the building contained no threats, the distant sound of artillery fire suddenly grew much closer. The building shook as shells began landing in their sector. "We need to move," Rodriguez urged. "Lieutenant Hayes will be waiting for our report." Thomas looked at Anna and the little girl, who had pressed herself against her aunt in fear at the sound of incoming shells. He made another decision then, one that would alter the trajectory of multiple lives. "We can't leave them here," he said firmly. "It's not safe. Tell her we're taking them to the civilian collection point near division headquarters. The Red Cross has set up food and medical stations there." Williams relayed the information, and after a brief hesitation, Anna nodded in agreement. She quickly gathered a small bundle of possessions and photographs, then took her niece's hand. The 5 of them, 3 American soldiers and 2 German civilians, made their way carefully down the stairs and out into the street. The artillery barrage had stopped momentarily, but the distant sound of small arms fire indicated that pockets of resistance remained active in nearby sectors. Lieutenant Hayes was not pleased when Thomas returned with the civilians in tow. "This isn't a refugee escort service, Sergeant," he said sharply, eyeing Anna and Lena with suspicion. Sir, with respect, division orders are to direct civilians to the collection points, Thomas replied evenly. These two were isolated in a building that's likely to become a combat zone again. Military necessity aside, it's the right thing to do. Hayes studied Thomas for a moment, then sighed. Fine, but they're your responsibility until we get them to the collection point, and we move out in 20 minutes, not a second later. Understood, sir. Thank you. As the platoon prepared to move, Thomas found a relatively sheltered spot where Anna and Lena could wait. He noticed the little girl eyeing his canteen and offered it to her. She drank thirstily, water spilling down her chin in her eagerness. Anna watched this interaction with an unreadable expression. When the girl finished drinking, Anna spoke to her in gentle German, and the child shyly offered the canteen back to Thomas. Sie ist ein gutes Kind, Anna said to him directly. She is a good child. Thomas nodded, understanding the simple phrase. Yes, she seems like a very good girl. To his surprise, Anna responded in halting English. I learn English in school before war. Her accent was thick but understandable. Your English is good, Thomas encouraged her, genuinely impressed. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Not good, but I try. This small connection, the shared effort of communication across language barriers, established a fragile thread between them. As they waited for the platoon to move out, Thomas learned that Anna had been a university student studying literature before the war disrupted everything. Her father had been a professor of history, her mother a pianist. Both were now dead. Her father from illness exacerbated by food shortages, her mother killed in an early bombing raid. The vulnerability and humanity of her story struck Thomas deeply. The propaganda that dehumanized the enemy suddenly felt very distant from this reality, a young woman who had lost everything but still maintained her dignity and cared for her orphaned niece amid the ruins of her world. When the platoon began moving toward the collection point, Thomas stayed close to Anna and Lena, watchful for any danger. The route took them through areas of heavy destruction, past other civilians picking through the remains of their former lives. Many eyed the American soldiers with a mixture of fear, resentment, and resignation, the complex emotions of a population facing defeat and occupation. Are you frightened of us? Thomas asked Anna quietly as they walked. She considered this question carefully before answering. Not you, she finally replied. The bombs, yes. Hunger, yes. Winter that past, yes. She paused. But not you. Not now. Her honesty affected him deeply. He had been fighting for nearly 2 years, had seen friends die and had taken lives himself, all while carrying the abstract ideals of freedom and democracy as his motivation. Now, faced with the very human consequences of total war, those abstractions seemed simultaneously more important and more complicated than ever before. They reached the civilian collection point by late afternoon. The American military had established the area in what had once been a school, now repurposed to process civilians, provide basic medical care, and distribute emergency rations. Red Cross workers moved efficiently among the hundreds of displaced persons, and military police maintained order at the perimeter. Thomas led Anna and Lena to the registration area, where Williams helped translate as a clerk took down their information. Anna would be provided with temporary identification papers that would allow her to receive rations and eventually be directed to more permanent refugee housing once it became available. You'll be safe here, Thomas assured her as the process concluded. There's food, water, and medical care if you need it. Anna nodded, clutching her small bundle of possessions. Thank you, Sergeant, she said, the formality of his rank sounding strange after their brief but meaningful connection. Thomas hesitated, knowing that his platoon would be moving out soon to rejoin the main advance. In the normal course of war, this would be the end of their interaction. A brief human moment amid the chaos, soon to be forgotten as both moved forward into their separate futures. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook and pencil. He wrote down his name and his military postal address. When things settle. If you need help, he said, handing her the paper. America has organizations helping with rebuilding, with immigration sometimes. I could write letters of support. The offer was impulsive, born from a desire to do something more than simply walk away. Thomas had no idea if Anna would ever use the information or if such letters would make any difference, but it felt important to extend some thread of possibility beyond this moment. Anna accepted the paper carefully as if it was something precious. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would an American soldier offer help to a German civilian?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "Because people are just people," he finally said, "no matter what side of a line someone tells us we're on." She studied his face for a long moment, then carefully tucked the paper into the bundle with her documents. "Danke, Thomas Miller," she said formally. "Gott segne dich." "God bless you." "Goodbye, Anna. Take care of yourself and Lena." He knelt briefly to the little girl's level. "Auf Wiedersehen, Lena," he said, one of the few German phrases he knew well. The child regarded him solemnly, then surprised him by stepping forward to give him a quick, shy hug, before retreating back to her aunt's side. With a final nod to Anna, Thomas turned and rejoined his unit, pushing away an unexpected feeling of loss as he prepared to continue the grim business of war. 2 days later, Thomas's platoon was engaged in clearing the last pockets of resistance from Nuremberg's outskirts. The fighting was sporadic but intense as they encountered desperate rearguard actions from German forces attempting to delay the Allied advance. During one such engagement, Thomas's squad came under fire while crossing an exposed street. As bullets ricocheted off nearby buildings, the Americans dove for cover behind a partially collapsed wall. "Sniper, second floor of the building with the red tile roof," Rodriguez shouted, pointing toward a structure about 100 meters ahead. Lieutenant Hayes assessed the situation quickly. "We need to flank him. Miller, take Williams and circle around through those buildings to the east. We'll provide covering fire." Thomas nodded and signaled to Williams. When Hayes initiated a volley of suppressive fire, the two men darted from their position and entered a damaged shop that would allow them to approach the sniper's position from an angle. As they navigated through interconnected buildings, Thomas's mind briefly flashed to Anna and Lena. Were they still at the collection point? Had they received proper food and medical attention? The momentary distraction troubled him. In combat, such lapses of focus could be fatal. Williams seemed to sense his preoccupation. "Everything all right, Sarge?" "Fine," Thomas replied curtly, refocusing on the mission. "Let's move up to the second floor of this building. Should give us a clear shot at the sniper's position." They ascended a damaged staircase carefully, testing each step before committing their weight. The building they occupied had once been a bookshop, with shelves now toppled and thousands of volumes scattered across the floors, many charred or water-damaged. "Culture in ruins," Williams murmured as they stepped over piles of books. Such a waste. Thomas said nothing. The schoolteacher's philosophical observations were often insightful, but sometimes ill-timed. They reached a window position that offered a clear view of the sniper's location across a small courtyard. Through his field glasses, Thomas could see movement in one of the upper windows, the barrel of a rifle momentarily visible as the German soldier adjusted position. "I've got him," Thomas whispered, readying his weapon. "Cover me." Williams positioned himself at an adjacent window, prepared to provide suppressive fire. Thomas took careful aim, steadying his breathing, as he had been trained to do. His finger tensed on the trigger. In that moment, an unbidden image flashed into his mind. Anna's face as she accepted his food rations, the complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and dignity in her expression. There was a connection between that moment and this one, though Thomas couldn't articulate exactly what it was, perhaps simply the humanity that persisted even in war's darkest corners. The momentary hesitation passed as quickly as it had come. Thomas squeezed the trigger, firing a controlled burst at the window where the sniper was positioned. Williams joined in, their combined fire forcing the German soldier to retreat deeper into the building. "Radio Hayes," Thomas ordered. "Tell him the sniper is suppressed but still active. We can maintain position here and keep him pinned while they advance." Williams relayed the information through their portable radio. A moment later, Lieutenant Hayes's voice crackled back. "Understood. Holding position for 5 minutes, then advancing. Be ready to provide covering fire." The minutes ticked by tensely as Thomas kept his weapon trained on the sniper's last known position. No further movement was visible, but he remained vigilant. knowing that experienced snipers could demonstrate extraordinary patience. When Hayes gave the signal, Thomas and Williams opened fire at the suspected position, allowing the rest of the platoon to advance across the exposed street and enter the building where the sniper had been operating. After several minutes of tense waiting, Hayes's voice came through the radio again. Building clear, sniper neutralized, regroup at the intersection. Thomas and Williams made their way back to rejoin the platoon. As they approached, Thomas could see the rest of the squad gathered around something or someone. Drawing closer, he realized they had captured rather than eliminated the sniper. The German soldier sat on the ground, hands secured behind his back. He was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with a gaunt face that spoke of the same privation Thomas had seen in Anna. A medic was treating a wound on the soldier's arm, where a bullet had grazed him. Lieutenant Hayes approached Thomas. "Good work drawing his fire. We managed to come up behind him while he was focused on your position." Thomas nodded, studying the captured sniper. The young German stared back defiantly despite his situation, a reminder that even as their country crumbled around them, many German soldiers maintained their fighting spirit. "What happens to him now?" Thomas asked. "Processing as a prisoner of war," Hayes replied matter-of-factly. "He'll be sent back to a collection point, then to a POW camp. Better than the alternative, especially this late in the game." Thomas understood the implication. With Germany's defeat now inevitable, surrendering offered these soldiers their best chance of survival. Fighting to the death for a lost cause made little sense, though fanaticism drove many to do exactly that. As they prepared to move out, continuing their advance through the city, Thomas found himself reflecting on the strange parallels between the young sniper and Anna. Both were Germans, caught in the machinery of a war that was grinding their world to dust. Both maintained their dignity in the face of defeat, and both now depended on the mercy of their former enemies for their immediate futures. These thoughts troubled Thomas as the platoon continued its operations over the following days. The complex moral territory of occupation, being both liberator and conqueror simultaneously, weighed on him as he witnessed both the relief of those freed from an oppressive regime and the suffering of ordinary people caught in war's destructive path. On April 25th, exactly 1 week after Thomas had encountered Anna and Lena, his unit received new orders. They would be pulling back from front-line duties and reassigned to occupation and governance operations in the areas already secured behind Allied lines. For many in the platoon, this news came as a relief, a sign that they might survive the war after all, with Germany's surrender appearing increasingly imminent. During a brief period of downtime, Thomas found himself drawn back to the civilian collection point where he had left Anna and her niece. He told himself it was simple human concern, a desire to ensure they had been properly cared for, but some deeper impulse guided his steps as he approached the school building now serving as a humanitarian center. The scene had changed considerably in the week since he'd last visited. More organized systems were now in place, with separate areas for registration, medical care, food distribution, and temporary housing. American military government officers worked alongside Red Cross personnel to begin the enormous task of addressing civilian needs and establishing order in the occupied territories. Thomas approached a registration desk staffed by a harried-looking corporal surrounded by stacks of paperwork. "Excuse me," Thomas began. "I'm looking for information on 2 civilians brought here about a week ago, a woman named Anna Müller and her niece Lena." The corporal barely glanced up. "Hundreds of civilians process through here every day, Sergeant. I wouldn't know specific individuals. Is there a record system? A way to check if they're still here or where they might have been relocated?" The corporal sighed and gestured to the overwhelming piles of forms around him. "We're trying to build one, but it's chaos. Best I can do is direct you to Section C, where families with children are being housed temporarily. If they're still here, that's where they'd be." Thomas thanked him and made his way to the designated section, a former gymnasium now filled with rows of cots. He walked slowly between the makeshift beds, scanning faces for any sign of Anna or Lena. The scenes of human suffering were difficult to witness. Elderly people too frail to move, mothers trying to comfort hungry children, the injured receiving basic care from overwhelmed medical personnel. Yet amid the hardship, Thomas also observed countless small acts of kindness and resilience, people sharing meager resources, improvising toys for children, creating moments of normality in profoundly abnormal circumstances. After nearly 30 minutes of searching, Thomas had nearly given up when a small voice called out behind him, "Americana! Americana!" He turned to see Lena running toward him, her face breaking into a smile of recognition. Behind her, Anna emerged from a group of women who had been waiting in line for water distribution. Thomas felt an unexpected surge of relief at finding them. "Hello again," he said, kneeling to Lena's height as the girl reached him. She immediately began chattering in German, pointing excitedly to her aunt. Anna approached more cautiously, surprise evident in her expression. "Sergeant Miller," she said formally, "you come back." "I wanted to make sure you were both all right," he replied, standing to address her. "Are you getting enough food, water, medical care if you need it?" Anna glanced around at the crowded conditions before answering carefully. "It is. Better than before. Lena has milk now. There is bread." She hesitated. "Many people here, not enough of everything. But we are alive." The pragmatic assessment was delivered without self-pity, a simple statement of facts. Thomas nodded, understanding both what she said and what remained unspoken, the uncertainty of their future, the loss of everything familiar, the precarious position of civilians in a defeated nation. "Have they told you what happens next, where you'll go when you leave here?" Anna shook her head. "They say perhaps countryside. Farms need workers. Cities are—" She searched for the English word, destroyed. Thomas considered this information. The American military government was indeed implementing policies to relocate urban refugees to rural areas where food production could be maintained and rebuilt. It made strategic sense, but would mean sending people like Anna, educated urban professionals, to perform agricultural labor for which they had no training or background. "Is that what you want?" he asked. The question seemed to surprise her, as if the concept of personal preference was incongruous with their current reality. "What I want," she repeated. "What anyone wants is not important now. We go where they tell us." The resignation in her voice troubled Thomas deeply. He understood the practical necessities driving occupation policies, but standing before this individual woman and child, the human cost of such broad directives became viscerally real. Before he could respond, an announcement echoed through the gymnasium, calling all residents to assemble for an information session regarding upcoming relocations. Around them, people began moving toward the center of the space. "I must go," Anna said, taking Lena's hand. "They count us at these meetings. If we are not there—" She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Compliance was necessary for receiving continued aid. "Wait," Thomas said impulsively. "I have tomorrow off duty. I could come back, maybe bring some additional supplies." He hesitated, then added, "And I'd like to talk with you more if that's all right." Anna studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to look beyond his uniform to the person beneath. "Why?" she asked again, the same simple question she had posed a week earlier. Thomas found himself unable to articulate a clear answer. Was it guilt, compassion, curiosity about this intelligent woman whose world had collapsed around her, or something more personal that he wasn't ready to acknowledge? "Because I'd like to help," he finally said, "if I can." After a long moment, Anna nodded. "We will be here," she said simply. "Danke." As she turned to join the gathering crowd, leading Lena by the hand, Thomas watched them go with a growing sense that something significant had begun, something that would extend far beyond the immediate circumstances of war and occupation into territories of human connection he had not anticipated when he first offered his rations to a starving woman amid the ruins of Nuremberg. The following day, Thomas arrived at the civilian collection center, carrying a small but valuable assortment of supplies he had managed to gather. His pack contained additional rations he had traded for with other soldiers, a few chocolate bars saved from care packages, a small blanket, and some children's vitamins obtained from a sympathetic medic. None of these items would dramatically change Anna and Lena's circumstances, but they represented something beyond mere physical necessities, a personal connection in the impersonal machinery of war and occupation. As he entered the gymnasium, where he had found them the previous day, Thomas was struck by how the space had transformed overnight. Red Cross workers had organized the area more efficiently, with separate sections marked off for different family groups. A makeshift school had been established in one corner, where children sat in small groups, receiving basic instruction from a volunteer teacher. Thomas spotted Lena among the children, her serious face brightening as the teacher distributed paper and pencils. He scanned the rest of the gymnasium for Anna and eventually found her near the water distribution point, helping an elderly woman fill a container. When she noticed him approaching, Anna's face registered brief surprise, followed by a reserved smile. She said something to the elderly woman, who nodded and continued the task alone before walking to meet Thomas. "You came back," she said, the simple observation carrying a weight of meaning beyond the words themselves. "I said I would," Thomas replied. He gestured to his pack. "I brought a few things. Not much, but—" He trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about the inadequacy of his offerings in the face of such overwhelming need. Anna nodded, her eyes showing a complex mixture of gratitude and something more difficult to define, perhaps pride, or the dignified reluctance to be an object of charity. "Thank you," she said formally. "Lena will be happy for the chocolate." Thomas glanced toward the children's area. "She seems to be doing well with the other kids." Following his gaze, Anna's expression softened. Children adapt, even to this. She was quiet for a moment before adding, "Her teacher says she is smart, quick to learn." The simple maternal pride in this statement struck Thomas powerfully. Even amid the chaos and uncertainty of their situation, Anna maintained concern for her niece's education and development, a profound expression of hope for a future that must have seemed terribly uncertain. "Would you like to sit?" Anna asked, gesturing to a relatively quiet corner of the gymnasium where a few chairs had been arranged. "Lena will be with her class for another hour." Thomas nodded, and they moved to the indicated area. As they sat, Thomas noticed that Anna looked marginally better than when he had first encountered her in the abandoned apartment building. She was still thin, but some color had returned to her face, and her movements were more energetic. The emergency rations and medical care provided at the collection center, basic though they were, had clearly begun to address the worst effects of prolonged hunger and exposure. "How are you?" he asked, genuinely wanting to know. Anna considered the question seriously before answering. "I am." She searched for the right English word, "surviving." One day follows another. "And after here, have they told you more about where you might be sent?" She nodded. "They say tomorrow or the next day trucks will come. We go to a village 30 kilometers south. They need people to plant crops for summer." A slight frown crossed her face. "I know nothing about farming. I studied literature and languages at university before the war." Thomas understood the uncertainty behind her words. The chaos of post-war Germany meant that millions of displaced people were being shuffled from place to place based on immediate needs, rather than any coherent, long-term plan. Urban residents with professional backgrounds were being sent to perform agricultural labor simply because food production was a priority for preventing widespread famine. "What would you want to do, if you could choose?" Thomas asked, curious about her aspirations beyond immediate survival. The question seemed to catch Anna off guard, as if the luxury of personal preference was something she had set aside long ago. She was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Before, I wanted to teach," she said finally. "At university level, German literature, perhaps English also." A shadow passed over her face. Now such dreams seem from another world. Universities are destroyed, books burned, the country. She made a gesture that encompassed everything around them, like this. Her assessment was accurate but incomplete. Thomas had seen military government reports indicating that the Americans and their allies were already developing plans for rebuilding educational institutions as part of broader denazification and democratization efforts. "Things will be rebuilt," he said. "Not immediately, but schools, universities, they'll come back. Your education won't be wasted." Anna regarded him with a mixture of skepticism and fragile hope. "Perhaps, if we are allowed such things again." The conversation turned to their backgrounds. Thomas told Anna about his life in Connecticut, where his father worked in a tool manufacturing plant and his mother taught elementary school. He had been studying engineering at a technical college when the war began, with plans to work in the aviation industry that was booming due to military demands. "And after the war?" Anna asked. "You will return to this study?" Thomas nodded. "That's the plan. Finish my degree on the GI Bill." Seeing her confusion, he explained, "It's a government program to help soldiers go back to school after service." "Your government plans for peace," Anna observed, "for what comes after fighting." The simple statement carried an implicit comparison that Thomas understood immediately. Many Germans, especially civilians like Anna, had been given no preparation for defeat. No framework for imagining life after the collapse of everything they had been told was permanent and invincible. Their conversation continued, touching on books they had read, places they had seen, and the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Despite the language barrier, Anna's English was functional but limited, and Thomas knew only basic German phrases. They found ways to communicate that transcended mere words. Gestures, expressions, and the shared human experience of living through extraordinary times created understanding where vocabulary failed. As the afternoon progressed, Lena was released from her lessons and came running over, clutching a drawing she had made. She presented it proudly to Anna, chattering in rapid German about the teacher and the other children. Anna listened attentively, responding with encouraging words before introducing Thomas again. "She remembers you," Anna told him with a small smile. "She tells the other children about the American soldier who gave her chocolate." Thomas felt oddly touched by this. He reached into his pack and brought out one of the chocolate bars he had brought, offering it to Lena. The child's eyes widened, but she looked to her aunt for permission before accepting. Anna nodded her approval, then said something in German that made Lena look solemn. The little girl broke the chocolate bar in half and offered one portion back to Thomas, saying carefully in English, "Share. Good." Surprised and moved by the gesture, Thomas accepted the returned portion. "Danke, Lena. Very good." The three of them sat together as the afternoon light filtered through the gymnasium windows, creating an incongruous moment of normalcy amid the abnormal circumstances of occupation. Lena showed Thomas her drawing, a simple house with flowers and sunshine, and he praised her artistic skills, earning a shy smile in return. When it came time for Thomas to leave, he felt a strange reluctance. The connection he had formed with Anna and Lena, brief though it was, seemed significant in ways he couldn't fully articulate. As they walked toward the exit, he found himself searching for a way to maintain that connection beyond this day. "I'd like to come back tomorrow," he said. "Before you're relocated. Would that be all right?" Anna studied his face, her perceptive gaze seeming to seek the motivations behind his words. "Yes," she said finally. "We would like that." Thomas nodded, relieved. "I'll bring more supplies if I can." "It is not necessary," Anna replied with quiet dignity. "Your company is enough." The simple statement affected Thomas deeply. In offering her his rations that first day, he had seen himself as the provider of material aid. Now he realized that the human connection itself, being seen as a person rather than just a uniform or a symbol of occupation, might be equally valuable to both of them. "Until tomorrow, then," he said, reluctant to leave but aware of the approaching curfew that would require him to return to his unit's position. "Until tomorrow," Anna echoed, standing with Lena at the entrance to the gymnasium as Thomas walked away. That evening, back with his unit, Thomas found himself distracted during the squad's usual card games and banter. Lieutenant Hayes noticed his preoccupation and pulled him aside after dinner. "Everything all right, Miller? You seem a million miles away tonight." Thomas hesitated, unsure how to explain his thoughts even to himself. "Just thinking about what happens after, sir. When we go home, what happens to all these people?" Hayes regarded him thoughtfully. "That's for the big brass and the politicians to figure out. Our job is to maintain order until then." He paused. "Any particular reason you're wondering about this now?" Thomas considered telling Hayes about Anna and Lena, but decided against it. While there was nothing explicitly forbidden about fraternizing with civilians, especially in humanitarian contexts. He sensed that his growing personal interest might be viewed as problematic by command. "Just seeing the civilian situation up close makes it more real," he said instead. Hayes nodded. "That's natural. Just remember, we can't save everybody personally. The systems being put in place will have to handle the rest." He clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "Get some rest, Sergeant. Word is we might be moving to administrative duties soon. Less front-line work." "Yes, sir. Good night." Later, lying on his cot in the darkness of the requisitioned building that housed their unit, Thomas found his thoughts returning to Anna. Their conversations had revealed her to be educated, thoughtful, and resilient, despite everything she had endured. The stark contrast between her potential and her current circumstances troubled him deeply. More troubling still was his awareness of growing personal feelings that went beyond humanitarian concern. There was something about Anna's quiet dignity, her intelligence, and her devotion to her niece that had affected him in unexpected ways. These feelings seemed impossible, inappropriate even, given their circumstances as occupier and occupied, victor and defeated. Yet as Thomas drifted towards sleep, he found himself wondering about possibilities that would have seemed unimaginable just weeks earlier. The following morning brought news that changed everything. As Thomas prepared to visit the collection center, a runner arrived with orders for the entire platoon. They were to report immediately for reassignment to a new sector 20 kilometers away, part of a broader reorganization of occupation forces. Lieutenant Hayes gathered the men to explain the situation. "We move out at 1400 hours today. Administrative occupation duties in Rothenburg. Pack essential gear only. The rest follows in transport." Thomas felt a surge of dismay. "Sir, request permission to delay report until 1700 hours. Personal matter to attend to first." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Denied, Sergeant. All hands needed for the transition. Whatever it is, will have to wait." His expression softened slightly. "We'll likely rotate back through this area in a few weeks if it's important." Thomas nodded, accepting the order while calculating rapidly. It was currently 0800 hours. If they departed at 1400, he had 6 hours, enough time to visit the collection center if he moved quickly. "Understood, sir. I'll be ready for departure at 1400. As soon as he was dismissed, Thomas gathered the remaining supplies he had collected for Anna and Lena and made his way toward the collection center at a rapid pace. The morning was bright and clear, contrasting sharply with his troubled thoughts. When he reached the gymnasium, he found the atmosphere had changed dramatically from the previous day. People were gathering belongings, children were being assembled in groups, and officials were moving through the crowd with clipboards, checking names against lists. Thomas spotted a Red Cross worker he recognized from previous visits. "What's happening? Are the relocations starting?" The woman nodded, looking harried. "Transport's beginning today. First group leaves in an hour for agricultural placements in the south. Second group tomorrow for factory work in the west. I'm looking for Anna Müller and her niece Lena. Do you know which group they're in?" The worker consulted her clipboard, running her finger down a list of names. "Müller, Anna. Yes, here. First transport, departing 0900 hours. She checked her watch. "Less than 30 minutes from now, they should be in the assembly area by the main entrance." Thomas thanked her and made his way through the crowded gymnasium, searching urgently for Anna and Lena. He finally spotted them among a group waiting near the doors, each holding a small bundle of possessions. Lena saw him first, tugging on her aunt's sleeve and pointing. Anna looked up, surprise and something like relief crossing her face as Thomas approached. "Thomas," she said, "they told us we leave soon. I thought perhaps that I wouldn't come back," he finished. "I promised I would." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Yes, you keep promises." The simple observation carried weight beyond the immediate circumstance, an acknowledgement of trust established between them, despite the improbable nature of their connection. Thomas gestured to the activity around them. "They told me you're being sent south today, for agricultural work." "Yes, a place called Mindelheim. They say it was not damaged in the fighting, that there will be work, food." She looked down at Lena, who was clutching her doll with one hand and Anna's skirt with the other. "A place for Lena to go to school properly." Thomas felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that they would be going to a relatively stable location, but dismay at the impending separation. "I received orders too. My unit moves to Rothenburg this afternoon." Understanding passed between them. The recognition that their brief connection, unlikely as it had been, was about to end as abruptly as it had begun. "I brought these for you," Thomas said, handing over his pack with the supplies he had gathered. "It's not much, but it might help until things improve." Anna accepted the pack with dignified gratitude. "Thank you. For everything." A whistle blew near the entrance, and an American officer began calling for the first group to prepare for boarding the transport vehicles. Around them, people began moving toward the doors, carrying what few possessions they had been able to salvage from their former lives. The moment of parting had arrived, more suddenly than either had anticipated. Thomas felt the pressure of things unsaid, possibilities unexplored. The rational part of his mind reminded him of the impossibility of the situation. He was an American soldier returning home when the war ended. She was a German civilian facing an uncertain future in a defeated nation. Whatever connection had formed between them existed in the extraordinary context of war, not in any sustainable reality. Yet something deeper than rationality compelled him to reach into his pocket and withdraw the small notebook he carried. He quickly wrote down his permanent address in Connecticut, tore out the page, and handed it to Anna. "When things stabilize, when mail service resumes between our countries, write to me, Hunt," he said. "Let me know how you and Lena are doing." Anna looked at the paper, then back at Thomas. "You want this? To hear from enemies?" "You were never my enemy," Thomas replied simply. "Not you, not Lena." She carefully folded the paper and tucked it into the bundle containing her identity documents and the few family photographs she had salvaged from her apartment. "I will write," she said softly, "when it is possible." The whistle blew again, more insistently. The crowd around them had thinned as people boarded the waiting trucks. "You must go," Thomas said, reluctant to speak the words but knowing they were necessary. Anna nodded. She said something in German to Lena, who stepped forward and, with childlike directness, hugged Thomas around the waist. "Danke for chocolate," the little girl said in her careful English. Thomas knelt to Lena's level. "You're welcome, Lena. Be good for your aunt." When he straightened, he found Anna watching him with an expression that contained too many emotions to name. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, acknowledging without words the unlikely humanity they had found amid inhumane circumstances. Then Anna leaned forward and kissed him lightly on the cheek, the gesture both formal and intimately personal. "Auf Wiedersehen, Thomas Miller," she said quietly. "God keep you safe." "Goodbye, Anna," he replied, the words inadequate for what he felt. "Take care of yourself and Lena." With a final nod, she took her niece's hand and turned toward the waiting transports. Thomas watched as they boarded, catching a last glimpse of them through the vehicle's window before it pulled away, carrying them toward an unknown future. He stood there long after the trucks had disappeared from view, feeling as though something essential had departed with them. A possibility, perhaps, or a glimpse of a world where boundaries of nationality and circumstance might be transcended by simple human connection. Finally, aware of his own approaching deadline to rejoin his unit, Thomas turned and began the walk back, carrying with him memories of an encounter that had somehow shifted his understanding of both the war he had fought and the peace that would follow. The following months brought sweeping changes as the European conflict officially ended and occupation duties evolved into reconstruction efforts. Thomas's unit remained in southern Germany throughout the summer of 1945, increasingly focused on civil affairs and governance rather than military operations. In August, Thomas received orders to return to the United States as part of the gradual drawdown of American forces in Europe. Like many soldiers, he had mixed feelings about leaving, relief at having survived and excitement about returning home, but also concern for the people they were leaving behind to rebuild from the devastation. On his final evening in Germany, Thomas found himself walking alone through a small Bavarian town that had become their base of operations. The streets were quiet in the summer twilight, with civilians observing an informal curfew more from habit than necessity. Signs of renewal were visible amid the destruction. Shops reopening with limited stock, children playing in cleared spaces, gardens planted in bomb craters. Thomas's thoughts turned, as they often did, to Anna and Lena. He had heard nothing from them since their parting at the collection center nearly 4 months earlier, though this was unsurprising given the chaotic state of civilian infrastructure and the restrictions on communication between Germans and Americans. He wondered where they were now, whether the agricultural placement had provided the stability they needed, whether Lena was attending school again. Most of all, he wondered if Anna ever thought of their brief connection with the same sense of significance he attributed to it. These unanswerable questions accompanied him on the long journey home, across the Atlantic by troop transport, then by train to Connecticut, where his family welcomed him with tears and celebration. In the whirlwind of homecoming, his thoughts of Anna receded temporarily, overshadowed by the immediate demands of reintegrating into civilian life. Thomas enrolled at the State University, using his GI benefits, resuming his engineering studies with a new seriousness born of his wartime experiences. The campus was filled with returning veterans like himself, men who carried invisible burdens of memory alongside their textbooks and who understood without explanation the adjustments required to live normal lives after witnessing the abnormal. Months passed, then a year. Thomas progressed through his studies, dated occasionally without finding anyone who inspired deeper feelings, and gradually built a life that resembled the one he had imagined before the war interrupted everything. Then, in October of 1946, a letter arrived from Germany. Thomas recognized Anna's handwriting immediately, though he had seen it only once before, when she had carefully written Lena's name on the child's drawing. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, which bore multiple postal stamps and routing marks, indicating its complicated journey. The letter was written in careful English, with occasional German phrases when the vocabulary proved challenging. Dear Thomas, I hope this letter finds you well and returned safely to your home in America. It has taken much time to establish reliable post service and even longer to receive permission to write to former Allied personnel. I have thought many times of our meetings in Nuremberg and wondered if you would remember us or wish to hear news from Germany. Lena and I remain in Mindelheim, where we were sent after the collection center. The agricultural placement proved fortunate, as this region suffered less destruction than many others. Lena attends school regularly now and is learning English properly, not just the few phrases she practiced with you. She still speaks of our American friend and the chocolate you shared. I have found work teaching at the local school, primarily German literature but also beginning English classes. The American authorities are encouraging English language education as part of the reconstruction efforts. My university credentials were eventually recognized, though many documents were lost in the bombing of Nuremberg. Life remains difficult in many ways. Food is still rationed, winter fuel is scarce, and the future of our country uncertain. But there are signs of rebuilding, both of structures and of spirit. I try to focus on these positive developments for Lena's sake. I often think of our conversations and your kindness during that terrible time. It would mean much to hear that you are well and building your new life after the war. Mit freundlichen Grüßen, Anna Müller-Thomas read the letter multiple times, absorbing every detail and imagining Anna and Lena in their new circumstances. The formal tone couldn't disguise the warmth underlying the words or the significance of Anna's effort to establish contact across the distance that separated them. He replied immediately, describing his return to studies, his family's reaction to his homecoming, and the strange experience of resuming normal life after the extraordinary conditions of war. He included a small package containing chocolate for Lena, coffee, still scarce in Germany, and several English language books for Anna. This exchange initiated a correspondence that continued regularly over the following months. Their letters grew longer and more personal, as language barriers diminished and trust deepened. Anna described the challenges and small triumphs of rebuilding a life from ruins, while Thomas shared his progression through university and his thoughts about the rapidly changing post-war world. In the summer of 1947, Thomas made a decision that surprised everyone in his life, including himself. Instead of accepting an engineering internship in Hartford, that would have advanced his career prospects, he applied for a position with the American Civilian Reconstruction Authority in occupied Germany. His wartime service, engineering background, and most valuable, his ability to work effectively with German civilians made him an ideal candidate. By September, he had returned to Europe, assigned to a reconstruction office in Munich, less than 100 kilometers from Mindelheim. The reunion with Anna and Lena was both joyful and tentative. Joyful in the genuine pleasure of seeing each other again, tentative in the uncertainty of what this renewed connection might mean. Lena, now 8 years old, remembered Thomas clearly and proudly demonstrated her improved English. Anna had changed too, still slim but healthier, more confident in her role as teacher and guardian, though the shadows of all she had lost remained visible in quiet moments. Thomas visited them regularly during his assignment, helping with practical matters like securing better housing and navigating the bureaucracy of occupation. More importantly, he became a friend and eventually something more, as the connection that had begun with a simple offer of food deepened into genuine understanding and affection. Their relationship faced significant challenges. Official policy discouraged fraternization between Americans and Germans, though enforcement had relaxed compared to the immediate post-war period. Cultural differences created occasional misunderstandings, and the shadow of recent enmity between their nations could not be entirely forgotten. Most challenging were the personal ghosts they each carried. Thomas's memories of combat against German forces, Anna's losses during Allied bombing campaigns, the knowledge that in different circumstances they might have been irreconcilable enemies rather than friends. Yet these very challenges ultimately strengthened their bond. They had each seen the worst humanity could inflict, and had chosen instead to seek understanding across the divisions that others maintained. Their relationship became a small but meaningful act of reconciliation in a world still healing from profound wounds. In December of 1948, Thomas was offered a permanent position with the European Recovery Program, the Marshall Plan, that would extend his stay in Germany indefinitely. The same week, he asked Anna to marry him. Her acceptance brought together two lives that war had first separated, and then, through an improbable act of kindness, connected. Their wedding was small but significant, attended by American colleagues and German friends, a living demonstration of the healing that could follow destruction. Lena, now 10 years old and fully recovered from the trauma of war, served as flower girl, beaming with pride and joy at the official joining of their improvised family. In the decades that followed, Thomas and Anna built a life that bridged their different worlds. They eventually moved to the United States, where Thomas worked in international development and Anna taught European literature at a small college. Lena grew up bicultural and bilingual, carrying forward the hard-won wisdom her unusual family history had provided. They maintained connections to Germany, returning regularly to visit friends and the places that had shaped their story. Anna never forgot her homeland or the suffering of its people, just as Thomas never forgot his comrades or the principles for which they had fought. But together, they created something new, a relationship founded not on forgetting the past, but on transcending it through understanding and compassion. Their story became known among friends and family as an example of humanity persisting even in inhumane circumstances. Thomas would sometimes tell people that the most important action of his military service had not been in combat, but in that moment of choice, to see the enemy not as an abstraction but as a person deserving of compassion. Many years later, when asked by his grandchildren about his most meaningful wartime memory, Thomas would describe that first encounter in the ruined apartment building in Nuremberg, a hungry woman and child, a decision to share food, and the unexpected life that unfolded from that simple choice. War divides us into artificial categories, he would explain, enemies and allies, us and them. But beneath those labels, we remain human. Sometimes it takes extraordinary circumstances to remind us of this ordinary truth. Anna would smile at these words, reaching for his hand across decades of shared experience, the connection that began with an offered ration, now woven into the fabric of a life built together from the ruins of conflict. In 1985, 40 years after their first meeting, Thomas and Anna returned to Nuremberg one final time. The city had been rebuilt, its medieval beauty restored alongside modern development, with few visible scars remaining from the devastation they had witnessed. Standing in the spot where they believed the apartment building had stood, now occupied by a small park, they reflected on the long journey from that initial encounter. Lena, visiting from her home in Berlin with her own children, joined them in this pilgrimage to the beginning of their unlikely family story. "It seems impossible that something so good could come from something so terrible," Anna said quietly, gazing at the peaceful scene around them. Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Perhaps that's the most important lesson of all," he replied, "that even in our darkest moments, the seeds of something better can be planted through simple acts of humanity." As they turned to leave, a young German girl, perhaps 6 years old, approached them shyly and offered Anna a flower she had picked from the park's garden. The gesture, so innocent, so natural, so reminiscent of another child in another time, brought tears to Anna's eyes as she accepted the gift with a gentle "Danke." The moment encapsulated everything their journey had taught them, that healing follows wounding, that connections transcend boundaries, and that the simple recognition of shared humanity contains the power to transform lives in ways no one could predict. Thomas and Anna Miller's story remained a testament to this truth, a reminder that even amid the largest conflicts, individual choices matter, that one person offering food to a hungry stranger might be planting seeds that would grow into a lifetime of love, understanding and reconciliation. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.